The Galactic Council of Sentient Races had endured for millennia, a fragile but essential union forged in the aftermath of the devastating Xeno Wars. At the heart of this precarious alliance stood the Acarian Empire, a technologically advanced civilization that leveraged its scientific and industrial might to establish dominance over the other member species. For generations, the Acarians had maintained an uneasy peace, their military might and economic influence serving as a deterrent against the more bellicose Deathworld species that dwelled on the fringes of known space. These rugged, martial races, the Kragoth, the Verugans, the Balerians, and others, were viewed with a mixture of fear and resentment by the more refined Acarians and their client states. Yet beneath the veneer of cooperation, tensions simmered. The Acarians, secure in their technological supremacy, had grown complacent, often exploiting their weaker counterparts through unequal trade agreements and heavy-handed political maneuvering. This resentment festered, particularly among the Deathworlders, who chafed at the condescending attitude of their Acarian overlords. Marvian Tholan, a seasoned Acarian diplomat, reflected on the delicate state of affairs as he paced the ornate corridors of the Galactic Council's central hub on Acaria Prime. The grand, shimmering edifice was a testament to Acarian architectural prowess, yet it also served as a constant reminder of their dominance. "Our hold on the Council is as secure as it has ever been," Tholan mused aloud, his footsteps echoing against the pristine marble floors. "The lesser species know their place, and they dare not challenge our authority." He paused, gazing out a towering viewport that afforded a panoramic view of Acaria's bustling capital. Gleaming spires and sprawling arcology complexes stretched out as far as the eye could see, the pinnacle of Acarian technological mastery. "And yet," Tholan muttered, his brow furrowing, "something unsettling lingers in the air, a growing restlessness, a desire for change. We must be vigilant." The diplomat quickened his pace, his mind racing with scenarios and contingencies. The Acarian grip on power had to be maintained at all costs. For the good of the galaxy, he told himself. The alternative was simply unthinkable. As Tholan approached the grand audience chamber, the ornate doors slid open to reveal a gathering of Acarian nobility and high-ranking officials. They stood in solemn silence, their expressions grave. "Ah, Marvian," greeted Averine Hesh, the Acarian High Chancellor. "We have been expecting you. Please, join us." Tholan nodded and stepped inside, the doors closing behind him with a soft hiss. The chamber was dimly lit, casting dramatic shadows across the austere, angular features of the Acarian leaders. "I trust you are aware of the incident that occurred on Kragoth Prime earlier today," Hesh said, his voice tinged with barely concealed anger. Tholan felt a chill run down his spine. The Kragoth were one of the most formidable Deathworlder species, known for their savage martial prowess and unyielding resolve. If they had dared to provoke the Acarians, the consequences could be catastrophic. "Yes, Chancellor," Tholan replied, straightening his posture. "The reports indicate that a diplomatic delegation was ambushed and slaughtered by a group of Kragoth extremists. Terrible tragedy, to be sure." Hesh nodded grimly. "The Council demands justice. We cannot allow such an act of aggression to go unanswered. The Kragoth must be made to pay for their transgressions." The other Acarian officials murmured their agreement, their faces etched with a mixture of outrage and determination. Tholan cleared his throat, weighing his words carefully. "Chancellor, I understand your desire for retribution, but we must tread carefully. The Kragoth are a proud and volatile species. Any hasty action could provoke a wider conflict that the Council may not be prepared to handle." Hesh raised a hand, silencing the diplomat. "That is precisely why we must act decisively, Marvian. The lesser species must learn that they cannot defy the Acarian Empire without consequence. We will summon the Kragoth representatives to Acaria Prime and demand they hand over the perpetrators. If they refuse..." He let the threat hang in the air, his piercing gaze sweeping across the assembled officials. Tholan suppressed a grimace. He knew all too well the likely outcome of such a confrontation. The Kragoth were renowned for their warrior culture and fierce sense of honor. They would sooner die than submit to Icarian demands. "Chancellor, I must urge caution," Tholon pleaded. "The Kragoth are not like our other client species. They will not be cowed by displays of force. Provoking them could unravel the fragile peace we have maintained for centuries." Hesh's expression hardened. "Your concerns are noted, Marvian, but the decision has been made. The Kragoth will be given one chance to comply. If they refuse—" He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Then we shall show them the true power of the Icarian Empire." Tholon opened his mouth to protest, but the Chancellor had already turned away, signaling the meeting's end. As the Icarian leaders filed out of the chamber, the diplomat stood alone, a growing sense of unease settling in the pit of his stomach. "The fragile peace," he murmured, shaking his head. "How quickly it can unravel." The Kragoth delegation arrived on Icaria Prime with an air of defiance, their warrior-clad forms a stark contrast to the graceful, technologically advanced Icarian architecture that surrounded them. Led by Warlord Grull, a towering figure with a weathered, scarred visage, the Kragoth contingent strode through the pristine halls of the Galactic Council's central hub, their footsteps echoing with purpose. As they were ushered into the grand audience chamber, the Icarian officials eyed them with a mixture of thinly veiled contempt and unease. Marvian Tholon, the seasoned Icarian diplomat, stood beside High Chancellor Averine Hesh, his expression carefully neutral. Hesh stepped forward, his regal bearing and authoritative tone betraying none of the tension that roiled beneath the surface. "Warlord Grull," the Chancellor began, his gaze sweeping over the Kragoth delegation. "The Icarian Empire has summoned you and your people to answer for the heinous attack on our diplomatic mission to Kragoth Prime." Grull met Hesh's stare with unwavering resolve, his massive arms crossed over his broad chest. "The attack was the work of rogue elements, Chancellor," he rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "They acted without the sanction of the Kragoth Dominion." Hesh's brow furrowed in skepticism. "And you expect us to believe that your warriors, known for their unparalleled discipline and ferocity, could not have prevented such an assault?" He shook his head, his lips pressed into a thin line. "No, Warlord. The Council demands that you hand over the perpetrators immediately, that they may face Icarian justice." Grull's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Justice," he spat, his lip curling in contempt. "The Icarians know nothing of justice. You speak of it only when it serves your interests." The Kragoth warlord took a step forward, the chamber suddenly electric with tension. "For generations, we have endured your condescension, your exploitation, your oppression. No more. The Kragoth will not submit to your demands." Tholon shifted uneasily, his gaze darting between the two leaders. He knew this confrontation was spiraling out of control, and the consequences could be devastating. "Warlord Grull," the diplomat interjected, raising a placating hand. "Surely we can resolve this matter through diplomacy. There is no need for further bloodshed." Grull's piercing eyes fell upon Tholon, and the diplomat felt a shiver run down his spine. "Diplomacy?" The Kragoth spat. "Your diplomacy is nothing more than a veil for Icarian tyranny. We will not be silenced or cowed any longer." The warlord turned his attention back to Hesh, his massive frame bristling with barely contained fury. "The Kragoth will not hand over any of our own. If the Icarian Empire wishes to see justice done, then come and take it." Hesh's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing to slits. "So be it, Warlord. You have chosen the path of war." The Chancellor swept his gaze across the assembled Icarian officials, his voice ringing with authority. "Mobilize the Imperial fleet. We will teach these Deathworlders the true price of defiance." As the Icarian leaders rushed to carry out Hesh's orders, Tholon felt a growing sense of dread. He knew that the fragile peace the Galactic Council had maintained for centuries was about to shatter, and the consequences would be felt across the galaxy. The diplomat watched helplessly as the Kragoth delegation turned and strode from the chamber, their warrior light-bearing and unwavering determination a stark contrast to the Icarians' technological superiority. "Warlord Grawl," Thalon called out, his voice tinged with a desperate plea. "Please, reconsider your actions. This will only lead to ruin for all." Grawl paused, glancing back at the Icarian over his shoulder. "The time for reconsideration has passed, Marvian Tholon. The Kragoth have chosen to stand and fight. For we are the masters of our own destiny." With those final words, the Kragoth delegation disappeared through the ornate doors, leaving behind a deafening silence and a growing sense of foreboding. Tholon stood alone in the chamber, his shoulders slumped with the weight of what was to come. He knew that the Icarians would not be deterred, and that their thirst for vengeance would only escalate the conflict. "The fragile peace," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "How quickly it has unraveled." The diplomat turned and made his way through the halls, his mind racing with the implications of the Kragoth's defiance. As he walked, he could already hear the distant rumble of Icarian war machines being mobilized, the prelude to a conflict that would shake the very foundations of the Galactic Council. Tholon steeled himself, knowing that the choices made in the days to come would determine the fate of the galaxy. He could only hope that cooler heads would prevail, but deep down, he feared that the age of Deathworlder ascendance had finally arrived. News of the confrontation on Icaria Prime spread like wildfire through the Galactic Council, igniting outrage and resentment among the lesser member species. While the Icarians had long dominated the political and economic landscape, many had grown weary of their heavy-handed rule and condescending attitude. In the halls of the Council's central hub, heated debates erupted as representatives from across the galaxy argued over the appropriate response. The Kragoth had struck a blow against the Icarian Empire, and some saw this as an opportunity to challenge the status quo. Vortok, a grizzled Balerian counselor, slammed his fist on the table, silencing the chamber. "The Icarians have grown complacent in their power," he rumbled, his deep voice commanding the attention of all present. "For too long, they have exploited us, treating us as mere vassals to be used and discarded at their whim." The Balerian fixed the Icarian delegation with a piercing glare. "Now the Kragoth have shown us the way. If we stand united, we can break the chains of Icarian dominance once and for all." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled counselors, and Tholon felt a lump form in his throat. The diplomat had feared this outcome, knowing that the Icarians would never relinquish their grip on power without a fight. "Counselor Vortok," Tholon began, his voice steady despite the turmoil raging within him. "I understand your frustration, but surely you must see the folly of open rebellion. The Icarian military might is unmatched. Any attempt to defy them would be utter ruin." The Balerian's eyes narrowed, and Tholon knew he had struck a nerve. The Kragoth have already defied the Icarians, and they still stand. Perhaps it is time for the rest of us to take a stand as well. Vortok turned to address the gathered counselors, his words resonating with a sense of purpose and urgency. "The Kragoth have shown us the way. They have refused to bow to Icarian tyranny, and for that they have our respect and admiration. Now, who among you will join them in this fight for freedom?" One by one, the representatives from the lesser member species rose to their feet, their voices joining in a chorus of defiance. Tholon watched, his heart sinking, as the Icarian delegation stood alone, their once formidable authority crumbling before the weight of the growing rebellion. As the meeting adjourned, the diplomat hurried to the Chancellor's chambers, his mind racing with the implications of what had just occurred. Hesh, the Icarian High Chancellor, listened with mounting fury as Tholon relayed the events. "Unacceptable," Hesh spat, his fist slamming against the ornate table. "The lesser species dare to defy us. This is an act of open rebellion, and it will not be tolerated." Tholon tried to reason with the Chancellor, but Hesh's rage was unyielding. "We gave them a chance to submit, and they chose war. Now they will face the full might of the Icarian Empire." The diplomat's protests fell on deaf ears as Hesh summoned his military advisors, issuing a series of swift, decisive orders. Within hours, the Icarian fleet was mobilized, its vast armada of warships and battle platforms poised to crush the burgeoning rebellion. As the Icarian forces prepared to strike, Fallen found himself caught in the middle, torn between his loyalty to the Empire and his growing realization of the folly of their actions. He knew that the Deathworlders and their allies were far more formidable than the Icarians had ever imagined, and that this conflict could spiral into a galaxy-wide conflagration. Chancellor, Folon pleaded one final time. Please, reconsider your course of action. The cost of this war will be incalculable, and the consequences could unravel the very fabric of the Galactic Council. Hesh regarded the diplomat with a cold, calculating gaze. The cost of inaction would be far greater, Marvian. The Icarian Empire will not be undermined by these upstart species. We will show them the true meaning of power. With a dismissive wave of his hand, the Chancellor turned away, leaving Tholan to watch helplessly as the Icarian war machine rumbled to life, its sights set on the growing coalition of Deathworlders and their allies. As the first salvo of Icarian weaponry streaked across the void, the diplomat knew that the age of reckoning had arrived. The fragile peace that had held the galaxy together for centuries had finally shattered, and the Deathworlders were poised to reshape the very course of history. The Icarian armada swept across the stars, its fleet of sleek, heavily armed warships and battle platforms projecting an overwhelming display of technological superiority. Margian Tholan watched from the command bridge of the flagship, his expression grim as the vastness of the Icarian might unfolded before him. The lesser species will have no choice but to submit, Averine Hesh, the High Chancellor, declared with unwavering confidence. Their primitive vessels will be no match for the firepower and precision of our forces. Tholan remained silent, his unease growing with each passing moment. He had seen the resolve and determination in the eyes of the Deathworlder representatives during the fateful council meeting, and he knew that their martial prowess should never be underestimated. As the Icarian fleet approached the first contested system, Hesh raised a hand, signaling the order to commence the assault. Tholan braced himself, his stomach tightening with dread as the opening salvo of devastating energy beams and missile barrages streaked across the void. The initial engagement was swift and decisive, with the Icarian warships unleashing a devastating barrage that tore through the hastily assembled Deathworlder fleet. Explosions blossomed across the night sky, and Tholan watched with a growing sense of unease as the Icarian forces pushed forward, their technological superiority seemingly overwhelming their opponents. Yet, as the Icarian armada advanced, a curious thing began to happen. The Deathworlder ships, despite taking heavy losses, refused to retreat or surrender. Instead, they fought with a ferocity and tenacity that caught the Icarians off guard. Pilots maneuvered their craft with reckless abandon, ramming into Icarian vessels and detonating their reactors in suicidal attacks. Boarding parties fought their way onto the enemy's command bridges, overwhelming the crew with sheer physical prowess and unbridled savagery. Tholan's eyes widened as he witnessed the spectacle unfold, the Deathworlders defying the Icarians' technological edge through sheer grit and determination. The diplomat's mind raced, struggling to comprehend the implications of what he was seeing. Impossible, Hesh muttered, his face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Their ships are no match for ours. How dare they defy the might of the Icarian Empire? The Chancellor's orders echoed across the command bridge, his voice tinged with a growing desperation. Intensify the bombardment. Crush these upstart species with the full force of our armada. Tholan watched helplessly as the Icarian onslaught redoubled, the once pristine void around them now a roiling maelstrom of fire and destruction. But despite the overwhelming firepower, the Deathworlders refused to yield, their ships darting through the chaos with a practiced agility that seemed to mock the Icarians' technological superiority. As the battle raged on, Tholan caught glimpses of the Deathworlder tactics. They employed unconventional maneuvers, exploiting the Icarian vessel's blind spots and weaknesses. Their ground forces proved equally tenacious, fighting with a ferocity that defied the Icarians' more disciplined and regimented approach. The diplomat's heart sank as he realized the gravity of the situation. The Icarian Empire, long accustomed to the deference and submission of their lesser counterparts, had severely underestimated the Deathworlders' martial capabilities. "Chancellor," Thalon ventured, his voice hesitant, "perhaps we should consider a pause in the offensive, a chance to regroup and reassess our strategy." Hesh whirled on the diplomat, his eyes ablaze with fury. "Reconsider? Marvian, you dare to suggest we retreat in the face of these barbarians? The Icarian Empire does not retreat. We will annihilate them, no matter the cost." The Chancellor's tirade was interrupted by a series of increasingly frantic reports from the various battle commanders. Thalon watched as the Icarian forces, despite their technological advantages, were systematically broken and scattered across the battlefield. Hesh's face drained of color, his confidence giving way to a growing sense of panic. "Impossible," he whispered, his hands trembling. "This cannot be happening. We are the masters of the galaxy." Thalon placed a tentative hand on the Chancellor's shoulder, his voice low and soothing. "Averin, we must face the reality of the situation. The Deathworlders have proven far more formidable than we ever imagined. Continuing this offensive may very well lead to the complete destruction of the Icarian Empire." Hesh stared at the diplomat, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. "Then what do you suggest, Marvian?" he rasped, the weight of his failure crushing him. Thalon took a deep breath, knowing that the path ahead would be fraught with peril. "We must sue for peace, Averin. We must acknowledge the strength of the Deathworlders and seek to negotiate a new balance of power in the galaxy." The Chancellor's face contorted with anguish, but Thalon could see the resignation in his eyes. The once mighty Icarian Empire had been humbled, its technological superiority no match for the sheer ferocity and determination of the Deathworlders. As the battered Icarian armada began its retreat, Thalon gazed out into the chaos of the battlefield, his heart heavy with the weight of this new reality. The fragile peace had been shattered, and a new era was dawning, one that would be shaped by the unexpected rise of the Deathworlders. The news of the Icarian Empire's stunning defeat at the hands of the Deathworlders reverberated across the galaxy, shattering the long-held assumptions about the balance of power. As the battered Icarian fleet limped back to its home systems, the other member species of the Galactic Council found themselves at a crossroads. Marvian Thalon, the ever-pragmatic Icarian diplomat, knew that this was a pivotal moment. The fragile peace that had held the galaxy together for centuries was now in jeopardy, and the future of the Council itself hung in the balance. In the Grand Assembly chambers, the representatives of the lesser species convened, their eyes shining with a newfound sense of purpose and defiance. Vortok, the grizzled Balerian counselor, rose to address the gathered delegates, his voice carrying a weight of authority. "The Icarians have been humbled," he declared, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Their technological might, their arrogance, their oppression, all of it has been laid bare for us to see. Now we have a choice to make." The Balerian paused, allowing his words to sink in. "We can either continue to cower under the shadow of Icarian dominance, or we can seize this moment and forge a new path for ourselves and the galaxy." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly, and Thalon felt a growing sense of unease. He knew that the Balerians' words were laden with both promise and peril, for the path they chose would determine the fate of the Galactic Council and the very future of the galaxy. "The Deathworlders have shown us the way," Vortok continued, his voice rising with conviction. "They have stood against the Icarian behemoth and prevailed. Now they offer us the chance to join them, to break free of the shackles that have bound us for centuries." The Balerian's gaze settled on Thalon, and the Icarian diplomat felt a chill run down his spine. "What say you, Marvian Thalon? Will the Icarian Empire continue to cling to its faltering power, or will it embrace the opportunity for change? Tholan straightened his posture, his mind racing with the implications of Vortok's proposal. He knew that the Icarians would never willingly relinquish their grip on power, and that refusing to join the Deathworlders would likely result in their complete annihilation. "Counselor Vortok," the diplomat began, his voice measured and diplomatic. "I understand the allure of the Deathworlders' offer, and I acknowledge the Icarian Empire's failure to anticipate the ferocity of their martial prowess. However, I must urge caution." Tholan paused, meeting the Balerian's unwavering gaze. "The Deathworlders are a proud and uncompromising species. If we were to join their cause, we would be trading one form of dominance for another. We must consider the long-term consequences of such an alliance." Vortok's eyes narrowed, and Tholan could sense the growing tension in the chamber. "Are you suggesting that we remain subservient to the Icarians, Marvian?" The Balerian challenged. "That we allow them to rebuild their strength and crush us once more." The diplomat raised a placating hand. "Not at all, Counselor. I simply believe that we must weigh our options carefully, that we must not hastily abandon the Galactic Council in favor of an uncertain future." Before Vortok could respond, the chamber doors burst open, and a contingent of Deathworlder representatives strode in, their warrior-like bearing commanding the attention of all present. "Counselors," a Kraggoth warlord, none other than Graal himself, rumbled. "The time has come to make your choice. Will you stand with us, or will you remain shackled to the Icarian Empire?" Tholan watched as the other delegates exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the decision before them palpable in the air. He knew that the Deathworlders would not be easily swayed, and that the Council's very survival hung in the balance. Slowly, one by one, the representatives rose to their feet, their expressions resolute. Vortok, a triumphant grin spreading across his face, turned to Tholan. "There you see, Marvian," the Balerian declared. "The lesser species have spoken. We will no longer cower in the shadow of the Icarians. We will join the Deathworlders and forge a new path for the galaxy." Tholan felt a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach as he watched the Deathworlder contingent nod in acknowledgement, their imposing forms a stark contrast to the Icarian delegation, who sat in stunned silence. "So be it," Graal rumbled, his gaze sweeping across the assembled counselors. "The Deathworlder Alliance welcomes you. Together, we will shatter the yoke of Icarian oppression and establish a new order, one built on the principles of mutual respect and the recognition of each species' unique strengths." As the Deathworlder representatives departed, Tholan turned to the despondent Icarian delegation, his expression grim. "The fragile peace has been shattered, my friends," he murmured. "A new era of conflict is upon us, and the Icarian Empire may not survive its onslaught." The diplomat knew that the die had been cast, and the galaxy was about to be plunged into a war, the likes of which it had never seen. The Deathworlders had arrived, and the balance of power was about to shift in ways that no one could have predicted. The Icarian Empire, long the uncontested hegemon of the Galactic Council, found itself reeling in the face of the Deathworlder onslaught. Marvian Tholan watched with a heavy heart as the once formidable Icarian legions were systematically dismantled, their technological superiority proving no match for the raw martial prowess and sheer determination of their opponents. Across the galaxy, the Deathworlder-led coalition surged forward, their forces spearheaded by the Kraggoth, the Varugans, and other rugged, warlike species. Wherever the Icarians attempted to make a stand, they were met with a relentless fury that swept aside their most advanced weaponry and tactics. Tholan, now a reluctant observer of the Icarian downfall, could barely recognize the once proud empire that had dominated the Galactic Council for centuries. The Chancellor, Averine Hesh, had become a shell of his former self, his confidence shattered by the repeated defeats that had befallen his forces. "How is this possible?" Hesh muttered, his hands trembling as he pored over the latest battlefield reports. "We have the most advanced technology, the finest military minds. Yet, time and time again, The Deathworlders triumph. The diplomat placed a reassuring hand on the Chancellor's shoulder, his expression grim. Averin, we have gravely underestimated the martial prowess of the Deathworlders. Their resolve, their tactics, their sheer ferocity. They have turned our technological superiority into a weakness. Hesh shook his head, his eyes narrowing with a desperate determination. No, Marvian. I refuse to accept this. The Icarian Empire will not be vanquished so easily. We will regroup, we will rally our remaining forces, and we will crush these upstart species once and for all. Thalon sighed, knowing that the Chancellor's words were little more than empty bravado. The Icarian war machine, once the pride of the galaxy, was now a shadow of its former self, its vastly outnumbered and outmatched forces struggling to stem the tide of the Deathworlder advance. As the battle for the Icarian homeworld raged on, Thalon found himself in the unenviable position of observing the Empire's final stand. The skies above Icaria Prime were ablaze with the fury of the conflict, the once gleaming spires and arcology complexes reduced to smoldering ruins. Amidst the chaos, the diplomat caught glimpses of the Deathworlder tactics, relentless, uncompromising, and utterly devastating. Their forces fought with a reckless abandon, seemingly immune to the Icarians' technological superiority. Pilots rammed their craft into enemy vessels, while ground troops fought with bare-handed ferocity, tearing through the Icarian legions with startling efficiency. Thalon watched in horror as the Icarian capital fell, the Deathworlder forces storming the Chancellor's palace and overwhelming the once impregnable defenses. Hesh, his last vestiges of hope extinguished, made a desperate final stand, only to be cut down by the Kragoth warlord, Graal, in single combat. As the Icarian Empire crumbled, Thalon felt a profound sense of loss. The galaxy he had known, the fragile peace he had helped maintain for so long, was now in ruins. The Deathworlders had risen to the fore, their victory a testament to the power of their unwavering spirit and unyielding determination. In the aftermath of the battle, Thalon found himself summoned before the Deathworlder contingent, their imposing figures casting long shadows over the diplomat. Marvian Thalon, Graal rumbled, his gaze piercing through the Icarian. You have witnessed the downfall of your precious empire. Now you must decide the fate of your people. The diplomat steeled himself, knowing that the choices he made in this moment would shape the future of the galaxy. Warlord Graal, he replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. The Icarian Empire has fallen, its grip on power broken. What do you propose for my people? Graal's expression remained impassive, but Thalon could sense a glimmer of respect in the Kragoth's eyes. The Deathworlder Alliance is willing to offer the Icarians a chance at redemption. The warlord rumbled, but they must prove their worthiness through service and fealty. Thalon felt a chill run down his spine at the Kragoth's words, but he knew that he had little choice. The Icarian Empire, once the unquestioned masters of the galaxy, now lay in ruins, its fate resting upon the whims of the Deathworlders. I will convey your terms to the Icarian people, Thalon replied, his shoulders sagging with the weight of the responsibility thrust upon him. But I must ask, Warlord Graal, what becomes of the Galactic Council in this new era? Graal's lips curled into a faint, almost predatory smile. The Galactic Council, as you have known it, no longer exists. In its place, the Deathworlder Alliance will forge a new order, one built upon the principles of mutual respect and the recognition of each species' unique strengths. The warlord paused, his gaze sweeping across the shattered remnants of the Icarian capital. The age of Deathworlder ascendance has arrived, Marvian Thalon, and those who refuse to bend the knee will be broken. As Thalon watched the Deathworlder forces secure their hold over the once mighty Icarian Empire, he knew that the galaxy would never be the same. The fragile peace had been shattered, and a new era of conflict and upheaval was just beginning. In the aftermath of the Icarian Empire's collapse, the galaxy found itself on the precipice of a new era. The Deathworlder-led alliance having triumphed over the once dominant Icarians, now set its sights on forging a new order that would reshape the very foundations of the Galactic Council. Marvian Tholen, the seasoned Icarian diplomat, found himself thrust into a pivotal role, tasked with navigating the delicate transition and ensuring the survival of his people under the Deathworlders' rule. It was a burden he had never envisioned bearing, but one that now rested heavily upon his weary shoulders. As the Deathworlder representatives convened to discuss the future, Tholen watched with a mixture of trepidation and cautious optimism. Warlord Graal, the Kragoth leader whose forces had spearheaded the decisive assault on Icaria Prime, stood at the center of the proceedings, his imposing presence commanding the attention of all present. "The Icarian Empire has fallen," Graal rumbled, his deep voice echoing through the cavernous chamber. "Its grip on power, its arrogance, its oppression, all have been swept aside by the might of the Deathworlder Alliance." The warlord's gaze swept across the assembled delegates, his expression unreadable. "Now we stand at the precipice of a new era, one in which the lesser species will no longer be shackled to the whims of a single dominant civilization." Tholen listened intently, his mind racing with the implications of Graal's words. The diplomat knew that the Deathworlders' vision for the future would be a dramatic departure from the Galactic Council's previous structure, and he could only hope that it would not come at the expense of the Icarian people's survival. "The Deathworlder Alliance," Graal continued, "will henceforth be known as the Galactic Confederation. This new order will be founded upon the principles of mutual respect, the recognition of each species' unique strengths, and the equitable distribution of power." The warlord paused, his piercing gaze settling on Tholen. "Marvian Tholen, you have been selected to represent the Icarian people in this new confederation. Your people will be granted a seat at the table, but they must prove their worth through unwavering loyalty and service to the greater good." Tholen felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but he knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. "Warlord Graal, I accept this responsibility on behalf of the Icarian people. We will work tirelessly to earn our place in this new era." The Kragoth leader nodded, his expression softening ever so slightly. "See that you do, Marvian Tholen, for the Deathworlders will not tolerate any further acts of defiance or subterfuge from your kind." As the proceedings continued, Tholen listened intently as the various Deathworlder representatives outlined their vision for the Galactic Confederation. Gone were the days of Icarian dominance, replaced by a system of shared governance and a recognition of each species' unique contributions. The diplomat was struck by the pragmatism and foresight displayed by the Deathworlders. Rather than seeking to subjugate or assimilate the former Icarian client states, they sought to empower them, to foster a spirit of collaboration and mutual growth. "The Galactic Confederation," Graal proclaimed, "will be a tapestry of diverse cultures and strengths. Each member species will be granted a voice, a stake in the future of the galaxy. Together, we will forge a new path, one that acknowledges our differences while celebrating our shared humanity." Tholen couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. The Deathworlders, for all their martial prowess and uncompromising resolve, seemed intent on building a more inclusive and equitable galactic order. Perhaps, he mused, this new era would not be one of unrelenting conflict, but of unprecedented cooperation and progress. As the meeting drew to a close, Tholen approached Graal, his expression determined. "Warlord, I must ask, what becomes of the Icarian people in this new confederation? Will we be granted the opportunity to redeem ourselves, to earn back the trust we have lost?" Graal regarded the diplomat with a thoughtful gaze. "That, Marvian Tholen, will be up to you and your people to demonstrate. The Deathworlders will not easily forget the Icarian Empire's oppression, but we are willing to extend a hand of fellowship to those who prove their worth." The warlord placed a heavy hand on Tholen's shoulder, his voice low and sincere. "The future is not set in stone, diplomat. It is yours to shape, with the Deathworlders as your allies, or your adversaries. Choose wisely." As Tholen watched the Deathworlder representatives depart, he knew that the path ahead would be treacherous, but also filled with the promise of a new era. The fragile peace had been shattered, but in its place, a chance for true, lasting change had emerged. The diplomat steeled his resolve, his gaze fixed on the horizon. For the first time in his long career, Marvian Tholen felt a glimmer of hope for the future of the galaxy. A future that would be forged not by the Icarian Empire's oppressive rule, but by the unexpected rise of the Deathworlders. In the aftermath of the Deathworlders' decisive victory over the Icarian Empire, the galaxy found itself grappling with the profound implications of the seismic shift in the balance of power. Marvian Tholen, the once influential Icarian diplomat, found himself at the heart of the momentous changes as he navigated the delicate task of integrating his people into the newly formed Galactic Confederation. As the Icarian delegation settled into their roles within the Confederation's governing body, Tholen observed the reactions of the other member species with a keen eye. Gone were the days of Icarian dominance and condescension. In their place, a newfound spirit of cooperation and mutual respect began to take root. The Deathworlders, led by the indomitable warlord Graal, had demonstrated an unwavering commitment to forging a more inclusive and equitable galactic order. They recognized the unique strengths and contributions of each species, and their willingness to embrace diversity stood in stark contrast to the Icarians' past policies of subjugation and exploitation. Tholen, once a staunch defender of the Icarian Empire, found himself gradually warming to the Deathworlders' vision. He witnessed firsthand the positive changes that were taking root: the free exchange of ideas, the collaborative efforts to tackle shared challenges, and the growing sense of galactic unity that had eluded the Galactic Council for so long. As the months passed, Tholen's initial trepidation gave way to a cautious optimism. The Icarian people, though humbled by their defeat, were granted the opportunity to redefine their role in the new confederation, leveraging their technological expertise and administrative prowess to contribute to the greater good. Yet, the diplomat could not escape the lingering shadows of the past. The Icarian Empire's oppressive legacy cast a long shadow, and Tholen knew that the Deathworlders and their allies would not soon forget the suffering inflicted upon them. Earning their trust would require unwavering dedication and a willingness to confront the sins of the past. In the Grand Assembly chambers of the Galactic Confederation, Tholen found himself addressing his fellow representatives, his voice measured and his gaze resolute. "My friends," he began, "we stand at a crossroads in the history of our galaxy. The Icarian Empire, once the unquestioned masters of our domain, has fallen, a victim of its own arrogance and the unexpected rise of the Deathworlders." Tholen paused, allowing his words to sink in. "For too long, we have taken our position of power for granted, exploiting the lesser species and dismissing their potential. Now we find ourselves humbled, our technological superiority rendered meaningless in the face of the Deathworlders' sheer martial prowess and unbreakable spirit." The diplomat swept his gaze across the assembled delegates, his expression solemn. "The fragile peace that we once knew has been shattered, and in its place, a new era of cooperation and understanding has dawned. We, the Icarian people, must now earn our place in this Galactic Confederation, not through dominance, but through the recognition of our shared humanity and our willingness to contribute to the greater good." Tholen paused, his eyes meeting Graal's, the Kragoth warlord's expression unreadable. "The Deathworlders have taught us a valuable lesson, that we must never underestimate the strength of the lesser species, that we must embrace their unique contributions and perspectives. For in doing so, we will forge a stronger, more resilient galaxy, one built on the principles of mutual respect and understanding." As the diplomat's words echoed through the chamber, a hush fell over the assembled representatives. Tholen could sense the weight of his message, the gravity of the acknowledgement that the Icarian Empire's reign had come to an end. Graal, the imposing Kragoth warlord, stepped forward, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the Icarian diplomat. "Well spoken, Marvian Tholen," the Deathworlder rumbled, a hint of respect in his voice. "The Icarian people have taken the first step towards redemption. Now they must prove their worth through their actions, not merely their words. The warlord's gaze swept across the Icarian delegation, his expression hardening. The road ahead will be long and arduous, for the scars of the Icarian Empire's oppression run deep. But the Deathworlders and our allies are willing to extend a hand of fellowship to those who embrace the true spirit of the Galactic Confederation. Tholen nodded, his resolve strengthening. We are ready, Warlord Grawl. The Icarian people stand ready to contribute their knowledge, their skills, and their unwavering dedication to the betterment of the galaxy. We will not squander this second chance, for we have been humbled by the lessons of the past. As the assembly adjourned, Tholen found himself standing alone, his gaze fixed on the distant stars. The fragile peace had been shattered, but in its place, a new dawn was rising, one that promised a future shaped by the principles of cooperation, respect, and the recognition of every species' unique strengths. The diplomat knew that the path ahead would be arduous, fraught with challenges and the lingering shadows of the Icarian Empire's oppressive legacy. But for the first time in his long career, Marvian Tholen felt a glimmer of hope, a hope that the lessons of the Deathworlders' unexpected rise would echo through the ages, guiding the galaxy towards a more inclusive and prosperous future.